And the winner is Peter Falk, Columbo.
In 1973, a mysterious script landed on NBC's desk, one that dared to take America's favorite detective into uncharted, terrifying territory. The villain, a killer with no motive, just pure, chilling evil. Network execs took one look and buried it. They claimed it was too dark, too disturbing, that viewers weren't ready. But the truth, the real reason this lost Columbo episode vanished for half a century is far more unsettling. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on what Hollywood tried to erase. Rewind to early 1960, when a crippling writers' strike brought the entertainment world to its knees. Two nearly broke screenwriters, Richard Levinson and William Link, were out of options. Until they found a crafty loophole. Live television, they realized, wasn't covered by the strike rules. So, in a moment of desperation, they banged out a murder mystery called Enough Rope for NBC's new live color series, The Chevy Mystery Show. It was frantic, rough, even a little underhanded. They tricked their own agent just to get it sold. But buried in that chaotic little script was something extraordinary. A rumpled, oddball detective named Lieutenant Columbo. Levinson and Link had no idea that this last-ditch gamble would give birth to a cultural icon. And the character, not entirely original. They'd been reading Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. The character Porfiry Petrovich, a soft-spoken sleuth who disarmed suspects with humility and quiet brilliance, inspired them. That became Columbo, unassuming, persistent, and deceptively sharp. And then came the twist. Instead of hiding the killer's identity, they flipped the script. Show the murderer from the start, then let Columbo slowly unravel their perfect crime. It was bold, psychological, and addictive. Audiences were hooked, but the first Columbo wasn't even Peter Falk. On July 31, 1960, Bert Freed played him in a live broadcast, reserved, watchful, and quietly effective. He held his own, but the magic was still to come. In 1962, the story evolved into a stage play titled Prescription, Murder. Thomas Mitchell stepped into Columbo's shoes. He brought warmth and wit to the role, and audiences responded, even if the play never made it to Broadway. Tragically, it was Mitchell's final performance. But in 1968, everything changed. NBC adapted Prescription, Murder into a made-for-TV movie. This time, they cast Peter Falk. Ironically, he wasn't even the first choice. Both Lee J. Cobb and Bing Crosby turned it down. But Falk was electric. He transformed Columbo into something unforgettable, a disheveled detective with a peculiar charm and a razor-sharp mind. In that first TV movie, Columbo looked surprisingly polished, neatly combed hair, pressed suit. But one thing stood out, that now iconic raincoat made its first appearance. And it never left. Peter Falk bought it himself during a rainy day in New York, for just $15. He wore it for the role, then never took it off. Turns out, it wasn't just a lucky find. The coat came from a luxury Spanish brand, but to Falk, it simply felt right. He started showing up to set in his own clothes. The scuffed shoes, the crumpled suits, even the beat-up Peugeot. All Falk's choices. That scruffy realism gave Columbo his grounded charm. He didn't look like a TV detective. He looked like a real one. What made Columbo mesmerizing wasn't just the look, it was the performance. Falk didn't just act. He played, especially with the other actors. He'd ad-lib lines, pause mid-thought, even fake confusion to throw off his scene partners. And it worked. Their frustration and unease mirrored their guilty characters perfectly. Sometimes, he'd pull out a grocery list instead of notes, or interrupt an interrogation to ask for a pencil. These weren't mistakes, they were tactics. The suspects didn't know what was coming, but the audience, they were in on the game. That made watching Columbo a thrill. And then, there was the line, just one more thing. Believe it or not, it started as a filler. A scene ran too short, and the writers didn't want to retype the whole thing. So they had Columbo casually walk back in with a question. That throwaway line became a legendary twist, the moment the killer's fate was sealed. Columbo was unlike any other detective. Even his first name was a mystery. Over decades of episodes, fans never got a clear answer. Sometimes, if you squinted, you might catch Frank Columbo on a badge, but the creators denied giving him any first name. That ambiguity, totally intentional. Then came the myth. Trivia writer Fred Worth invented Philip Columbo as a trap to catch plagiarists. When Trivial Pursuit used it, he sued, and lost. Still, the name stuck in pop culture. Even at his nephew's wedding, no one dared call him anything but Lieutenant. Imagine your family not knowing your first name. But that was the Enigma of Columbo. And behind the scenes, things were just as intense. Each Killer of the Week guest star was carefully chosen, often from a pool of dozens. At one point, they even courted giants like Orson Welles and Peter Sellers. Sellers demanded so much money, they passed. Falk himself had a say. He rejected Danny Kaye without ever explaining why. When NBC was developing the series in 1971, execs weren't sold. In fact, they were nervous. TV had rules back then, strict ones. The hero had to appear right away, or viewers might flip the channel. But Columbo's creators, Richard Levinson and William Link, didn't care about rules. They made audiences wait nearly 30 minutes before Columbo even walked on screen. It was unheard of. NBC executives panicked, calling it the longest delay for a main character in TV history. They expected viewers to tune out, but what followed flipped the detective genre on its head. Instead of a standard whodunit, Columbo revealed the killer up front. That was the twist. The audience watched the murder unfold. They saw every step of the killer's plan, down to the last detail. And then, with a quiet entrance and a simple question, Columbo began picking it all apart. Knowing who did it didn't kill the suspense, it supercharged it. It turned into a game of how he would catch them, not if. And Columbo didn't need guns, chasers, or punches. He relied on politeness, common sense, and a laser focus on tiny details. A wine stain here, a thermostat reading there. But underneath that detective work was something even deeper. It was a story about class. Columbo was working class to the bone. Old car, wrinkled raincoat, cheap cigars, constant stories about his unseen wife. His targets, doctors, celebrities, tycoons, high-ranking military brass. They believed they were above the law. Columbo never let them feel that way. He'd compliment their art collections or casually say his wife had something, just like it, just to rattle them. Columbo quietly exposed the arrogance of the elite and reminded them they could be caught. But not everyone at NBC appreciated that tone. After just a few episodes, execs demanded changes. They wanted Columbo on screen sooner. They wanted a more conventional format. But the creative team held the line. Levinson, Link, producer William Finneman, and Falk himself refused. They were ready to walk if the show's essence was compromised. It was a bold stand, and it paid off. Audiences responded with loyalty and growing numbers. NBC backed down. When Columbo debuted on September 15, 1971, as part of the network's mystery movie rotation, it wasn't just another detective series. It quickly became the standout. And Peter Falk's performance was a driving force. That first season, he took home an Emmy. Over time, he'd win 4 more, plus a Golden Globe. Falk's unpolished charm and subtle brilliance made Columbo unforgettable. He never needed flash. He had something better, authenticity. All it took was just one more thing, and suddenly, everything unraveled. NBC's rotating movie format gave Columbo extended episodes, sometimes up to 90 minutes. That extra time let the writers build tension slowly, flesh out characters, and deliver suspense that felt cinematic. It didn't just feel like a movie, it was one, every week. The format worked so well that NBC moved the show to Sunday nights, where it crushed the competition. Columbo wasn't just a hit anymore. It was a primetime powerhouse. But no one predicted how far it would go. It didn't stay locked to American TV screens. It became a global phenomenon. Syndicated in 44 countries, Columbo won hearts around the world. In Hungary, fans even built a statue of him. In Romania, audiences were so devastated by the show's end that Peter Falk had to record a message assuring them it hadn't been censored, just concluded. Decades later, the BBC still called it timeless. Why? Because Columbo's persistence, his quiet justice, and the joy of seeing smug killers fall, it resonated everywhere. And those killers, being caught by Columbo, became a badge of honor. Big-name actors lined up for the chance. Jack Cassidy did it 3 times. William Shatner twice. Patrick McGoohan not only starred but won Emmys. Leonard Nimoy, Robert Culp, George Hamilton. Even Martin Landau played twin murderers in one unforgettable episode. It was a performance showcase. And the talent wasn't limited to the actors. Behind the camera, Columbo attracted greatness. A 24-year-old Steven Spielberg directed the first regular episode. Peter Falk saw the talent instantly. "This guy's too good for us," he said. Then, in the summer of 1973, something unexpected happened. Brian De Palma, a rising auteur who hated television, pitched a Columbo episode. Yes, the same De Palma who had just released Sisters, a dark Hitchcockian thriller. But Columbo impressed him enough to break his own rules. He teamed up with his friend Jay Cox, a film critic, and submitted a spec script under a fake name, Joseph P. Gillis, borrowed from Sunset Boulevard. It was an inside joke and a statement. The story was bold. A filmmaker named Quentin Lee, modeled after figures like Truman Capote, murders a talk show host, and films it. This wasn't just about killing. It was an experiment, a murder with no motive. He chose his victim at random, calling him a public zircon, a fake diamond. Cheap, unworthy. Then, he takes it further, making a documentary about the murder, secretly featuring Columbo in the footage as the case unfolds. It went full meta. 3 film students even follow Columbo with cameras, one named Spielberg, a sly nod to the real director who'd already worked on the show. But the timing was all wrong. A writer's strike had thrown production into chaos. Another script, Double Exposure by Stephen J. Cannell, was submitted at the same time. It featured a killer using subliminal messaging to commit murder. It was simpler, faster to film, easier under pressure. De Palma's script, rich with layered storytelling and visual style, was riskier. The producers loved it, maybe more than some episodes they did make, but they simply couldn't pull it off in time. Elements from De Palma's pitch didn't vanish entirely. The student film crew idea appeared later in Mind Over Mayhem, where one character was even named Steven Spielberg, a wink to De Palma's lost script. But the deeper issue, tone. Columbo typically featured killers with clear, selfish motives: money, revenge, power. But De Palma's villain didn't care about any of that. He wanted to make a statement. A murder as an artistic experiment. It echoed Hitchcock's Rope, where the killers believed they were smarter than everyone else. But that wasn't what Columbo was about. The producers likely worried the audience wouldn't connect with such a cold, detached character. De Palma's usual themes, watching people through cameras, blurring the line between truth and performance, were powerful, but they didn't fit the cozy, Sunday night vibe Columbo had cultivated. Some even imagined John Lithgow in the role, but they feared he was too tall, too intimidating for TV at the time. In the end, De Palma's episode was shelved, buried beneath production struggles and creative differences. Columbo had a formula, and it worked. The killer was revealed at the start. The mystery wasn't about who did it but how Columbo would catch them. Slow, clever, polite, and Columbo always sniffed out the truth. But then, in 1992, came No Time to Die, and everything changed. No murder to start, no calm, methodical investigation. Just panic, chloroform, and a disturbing kidnapping on a honeymoon. It felt more like a horror movie than a Columbo episode. Instead of quiet deduction, Columbo teamed up with a police unit, held a gun, and raced against the clock. The final moments, gunfire, nothing like the Columbo fans had known. Some called it bold, most called it the worst episode ever. But it wasn't the only time the show took a strange turn. In 1989, Columbo returned after an 11-year hiatus with Murder, Smoke, and Shadows, a Hollywood-themed episode that leaned into theatricality. The villain was a flashy young director, more of a parody of Spielberg than a real threat. One scene, where Columbo wobbled on a waterbed, dragged on for more than 10 minutes. And the big reveal: police officers, dramatically dressed in costumes, popped out under spotlights with music blaring like a stage show. It felt more like a joke than a mystery. Yet, compared to what followed in the revival years, some fans later defended it. That same year, Murder, a self-portrait arrived, and things got even stranger. Instead of piecing together clues, Columbo solved the case by interpreting surreal dream sequences recorded by the victim. Meat in sinks, pocket watches in teacups, a French uncle representing a monocle. It was a bizarre, symbolic journey. The killer, a narcissistic artist, living with both his current and ex-wives until one of them dies. The plot leaned heavily on psychology and symbolism but barely made sense. Columbo suddenly seemed more like a trained therapist than a detective. And those repressed memories, completely fake, but the portrait he received at the end still made an impression, if only the plot had made as much sense. Fast forward to 2003, and Columbo was investigating raves. Yes, raves. Columbo Likes the Nightlife was the last episode ever made, and it attempted to drag the rumpled detective into the 21st century. Loud music, neon lights, and sweaty dances replaced the usual quiet living rooms and cigar smoke. Columbo wore a feather boa, wandered through nightclubs, and even retrieved a toenail clipping from a toilet. The plot involved a cover-up, a murder, and a tabloid journalist, but most viewers remember the episode for how surreal and awkward it felt. Some loved the attempt to modernize Columbo. Others missed the old days. Not every misstep was bizarre by design. In 1972, Peter Falk got his chance to direct with Blueprint for Murder. It was a tough shoot. Falk was frustrated with the producers, who handed him an episode set at a real construction site, just to make things harder. He called Spielberg and Cassavetes for help, even paying extras out of his own pocket when the studio refused. The result? Uneven. There was no murder shown on screen, and the pacing was all over the place, fast at first, then dragging. Even the music choices felt off, with the same Brahms concerto repeating endlessly. Falk's acting suffered too. Juggling both directing and acting roles was tough, and Falk never directed another episode. When Peter Falk played Columbo in Columbo Likes the Nightlife, 2003, fans assumed it was the end. But behind the scenes, Universal Studios had quietly started work on one last episode, the 70th and final case. Titled Columbo's Last Case, it was meant to be a heartfelt farewell. By then, Falk was nearing 80, and he wanted to leave the stage with dignity, one final time in his iconic rumpled coat. A 100-page script was crafted, with a modern, high-tech murder and classic Columbo twists. The episode even featured Larry King in a cameo. It was the perfect way to mark Columbo's 40th anniversary. But ABC wasn't interested, citing Falk's age, despite his long-running success. Universal tried reaching out to international investors, but the project stalled. Then, in 2007, Falk's health began to decline. His memory started slipping, and by 2008, it was confirmed he had Alzheimer's. By 2009, it was clear there would be no final episode. Falk, who had once been the sharpest detective on TV, no longer even remembered being Columbo. The farewell episode that had been carefully planned for Columbo was never filmed. In 2011, Peter Falk passed away at 83 from complications related to pneumonia and Alzheimer's, taking Columbo with him. Falk may have looked like a tired detective in a rumpled coat, but he was deeply committed to his work. He didn't just play Columbo, he was Columbo. He brought his own clothes, insisted on every detail, and refused to be rushed. A simple scene could take weeks to perfect because Falk would stop to rework lines or dive into character motivations. His famous raincoat was his own, and that meandering style was a carefully calculated choice to keep actors on their toes. Falk wasn't afraid to make bold choices, even rejecting Danny Kaye's cameo in Negative Reaction, the only time he blocked an actor from the show. It was his vision, and if something didn't fit, it was out. Behind the scenes, writers struggled with the show's unique format, revealing the murder up front. The pressure was intense, and quality sometimes slipped, especially when episodes were extended to 2 hours. But in 2020 to 2023, the show saw a 300% spike in streaming. Younger viewers, drawn to its slow pace and anti-rich theme, embraced Columbo. Social media helped, too. Memes and edits turned the scruffy detective into an internet sensation. Columbo's quirks, his unseen wife, his ancient Peugeot, and the iconic "Just One More Thing" made him beloved across generations. Fans still debate whether Columbo was lucky or secretly brilliant. Either way, his charm never changed. By the time you figured him out, he'd already solved the case.